The story of economics is not a march toward truth. It is a long negotiation between humanity and the systems it builds to survive. Welcome to the final scene from the book, The History of Economics in 25 Scenes. Today we step back, not to conclude, but to reflect, to ask what this long journey has really been about. From the first markets of grain and labor to the abstractions of algorithms and data, economics has always searched for balance. At times it trusted hierarchy, then freedom, then equations, then power. Each age believed it had found the key, a rule, a law, an invisible hand that could reconcile desire with order. And each age, sooner or later, discovered the cost of its certainty. We have seen the market imagined as harmony, then exposed as conflict. We watched value move from land to labor, from labor to utility, from utility to data. We saw economics dress itself as theology, physics, engineering, and finally politics. Again and again, it promised neutrality, and again it revealed its moral weight. What endures is one tension. The market is a powerful tool, but a dangerous master. It creates wealth, but not meaning. It allocates resources, but not dignity. When trusted blindly, it hollows societies. When controlled absolutely, it suffocates them. Between these extremes lies no formula, only judgment. Here is the thought that closes the book. Economics works best when it remembers what it is not. It is not a substitute for ethics, not a replacement for politics, not a machine that absolves responsibility. And one final provocation. If markets exist to serve people, why do we so often reshape people to serve markets? This is where the story ends and where the responsibility begins. The key ideas of this epoch form a quiet confession. Modern economics no longer believes in its own innocence. What once looked like a clean science of order has slowly turned into an inquiry into imperfection. The discipline begins to accept that it is not studying machines, but people. And people are inconsistent, anxious, imaginative, and deeply social. In that sense, economics starts to resemble the civilization it serves, complex, adaptive, and fragile. The first crack appears in the myth of rationality. Heuristics and biases overturn the idea of the calculating economic mind. Instead of optimization, they reveal storytelling. Humans rely on shortcuts to survive in a world too complex to compute. Anchors pull judgments toward irrelevant numbers. Availability bias makes us fear what we remember, not what is likely. Confirmation bias protects belief from contradiction. Error is no longer a nuisance around the model. It becomes the model. Economics begins to see the mind not as a broken calculator, but as a creature shaped by habit, emotion, and uncertainty. From this insight grows something more practical. Nudge economics accepts irrationality and works with it. If people predictably err, institutions can quietly help them choose better without coercion. Automatic enrollment increases pension savings. The placement of food changes diets. Choice is preserved, but the environment is redesigned. This is paternalism without command. The state no longer disciplines, it arranges. Freedom survives, but it is gently guided rather than left alone. Yet behavior is only one part of the illusion. For decades, markets were treated as natural organisms that emerged spontaneously wherever humans traded. Institutional economics dismantles that belief. Markets do not exist in nature. They exist inside law, culture, and shared expectations. Property rights, contracts, trust, these are not given. They are built, maintained, and constantly tested. Without them, exchange collapses into opportunism. Markets turn out to be social architectures, not natural forces. Invisible cathedrals constructed from habits of cooperation. Once institutions are recognized, a harder question follows. Who shapes them? public choice theory offers an uncomfortable answer. Politics is not a realm of virtue standing above the market. It is a market of its own. Voters pursue benefits. Politicians pursue survival. Bureaucrats pursue budgets. Democracy becomes an exchange of influence. The state is not neutral, but neither is it optional. Its invisible hand is not divine. It is human, fallible, and necessary. The same realism returns in the analysis of inequality. For a long time, disparities were treated as temporary or moral accidents. Then a simple relationship reappears. When the return on capital grows faster than the economy itself, ownership outpaces effort. Wealth accumulates faster than wages can rise. Inequality stops looking like a failure of policy and begins to look like a structural tendency. Profit and labor reveal themselves as competing claims to dignity. Left alone, the market does not equalize. It concentrates. But concentration is not fate everywhere. Institutions matter again. Some societies build inclusive systems that protect rights, spread opportunity, and reward innovation. Others allow elites to capture the rules and turn growth into extraction. Prosperity, in this view, is not produced by geography or intelligence, but by legitimacy. When people believe the rules are fair, they invest, cooperate, and innovate. When they do not, wealth turns predatory. Growth decays into plunder. Taken together, these ideas mark a decisive shift. Economics stops pretending to be neutral. It becomes reflexive. It studies not only behavior, but the moral architecture that makes behavior possible. Markets are revealed as belief systems. They depend on trust that contracts will hold, that effort will be rewarded, that tomorrow will honor today's promises. When that belief erodes, no algorithm can repair it. The language of the discipline changes accordingly. Rationality gives way to bias. Equilibrium gives way to adaptation. Growth gives way to inclusion. Neutrality gives way to responsibility. Economics begins to borrow openly from psychology, sociology, and ethics, not as decoration, but as realism. If the 19th century imagined economics as the physics of wealth and the 20th as the engineering of policy, the 21st treats it as anthropology, the study of how imperfect humans sustain cooperation under uncertainty, how rules, norms, and institutions make life predictable enough to be lived together. This is the deeper lesson of the epoch. The economy is not a machine to be perfected. It is a conversation to be maintained. Its success depends less on precision than on trust, less on optimization than on legitimacy, less on equations than on belief. Modern economics, at its best, no longer promises harmony. It promises understanding, and that may be the most honest balance it has ever achieved. The long journey of economics ends not with victory, but with recognition. After 3 centuries of confidence and collapse, the discipline finally admits what it long resisted. Ambiguity is not a flaw to be eliminated. It is the natural condition of any science that studies human beings. Contemporary economics abandons the illusion of neutrality, the comforting belief that markets are self-regulating mechanisms floating above history and morality. It recognizes instead that the market is a human invention, a fragile construction of trust, law, habit, and emotion that holds civilization together only so long as people believe in it. The central question quietly changes, no longer how the market works, but why it works as it does, and inevitably, for whom. From Adam Smith's moral sentiments to Marx's fury at exploitation, from Keynes's hope for wise stewardship to Friedman's faith in discipline, the same tension pulses beneath every theory. Freedom and order, reason and desire. Each generation designs a new intellectual machine to resolve that tension, and each discovers the same thing. The machine reflects its makers. Brilliant, anxious, fallible. What begins as a search for universal law turns, over time, into a chronicle of human limitation. By the late 20th century, the dream of pure rationality collapses. Behavioral economics dismantles the myth of the calculating mind. Institutional economics reveals that every transaction rests on invisible scaffolds of culture, law, and legitimacy. The new political economy exposes the moral stakes embedded in policy, power, and inequality. Out of their convergence comes no grand model, no final theory. Something more modest and more demanding. A new consciousness. Economics as a human science, inseparable from psychology, history, and ethics. This new paradigm no longer chases perfection. It does not promise equilibrium. It seeks coherence, a fragile, provisional order born of learning and humility. It understands that systems do not run themselves, that progress is not the triumph of reason over emotion, but their uneasy partnership. Rationality without empathy hardens into tyranny. Empathy without reason dissolves into chaos. Civilization survives only by holding the two in tension, by building institutions strong enough to absorb human weakness and flexible enough to preserve human freedom. With this recognition, the economist's role changes. He is no longer a mechanic adjusting the levers of interest rates, trade flows, or incentives. He becomes an interpreter of meaning, part historian, part psychologist, part moral philosopher. The economy he studies is no longer an engine, but a mirror. Inflation, inequality, growth, crisis. These are not just indicators. They are symptoms of how a society distributes trust, fear, responsibility, and hope for the future. The great schools that once divided the world now appear as moments in a longer conversation. Liberal and socialist, Keynesian and monetarist. Each carried a fragment of truth distorted by the arrogance of universality. Marx reminds us that production shapes power. Hayek that freedom requires limits. Keynes that the future depends on confidence. Friedman that rules can guard against folly. Minsky that stability invites complacency. Rothbard that liberty cannot be decreed. Their arguments never resolve because they mirror the human condition itself, the constant oscillation between control and chaos. What survives is not doctrine, but awareness. At its most mature, economics becomes philosophy by other means, a reflection on how fragile beings create systems larger than themselves, and then struggle to live within them. It stops telling stories about machines and starts telling stories about meaning, about how people use prices, policies, and institutions to negotiate what they value most: security, dignity, belonging, hope. Seen in this light, the path from the wealth of nations to algorithms, big data, and behavioral nudges is not a simple tale of progress. It is a story of self-discovery. Humanity learns that it cannot escape its own reflection: the invisible hand and the visible state, the planner and the entrepreneur, law and impulse. All are expressions of the same restless intelligence searching for balance. And so, economics returns, paradoxically, to its beginning. Once again, it studies not wealth alone, but the soul that creates it. It no longer seeks harmony in equations, but in the acceptance that order and chaos are two names for the same human world. A world where freedom is both promise and peril, where every crisis is also an invitation to learn, to adjust, to understand ourselves a little better. The age of machines is ending. The age of humanity is beginning. Whether this recognition will save us or simply make us wiser remains uncertain. But it restores to economics what it once gave civilization and then forgot: a conscience. This is where the story finally rests. Not because the questions are answered, but because they are now fully visible. Across 25 scenes, economics reveals itself not as a path toward certainty, but as a record of human self-understanding. Each theory is less a discovery than a confession. Each model carries the hopes and fears of its time. What begins as an attempt to explain markets slowly becomes an attempt to explain ourselves. We have watched order turn into freedom, freedom into calculation, calculation into power, and power into responsibility. We have seen the market imagined as harmony, exposed as conflict, purified into equations, and returned to politics and ethics. Again and again, economics tries to escape the human condition, and again, it returns to it. Here is the final thought of this book. There is no perfect balance between man and market, only a living tension that must be renegotiated by every generation. When markets are treated as gods, they hollow societies. When states are treated as saviors, they suffocate them. Between these extremes lies no formula, only judgment, memory, and moral courage. And here is the last provocation. If economics is the story of how we organize life, then every price, every policy, every crisis is a choice about what kind of people we want to be. This series ends here, but the conversation does not. Because as long as humans trade, plan, fear, hope, and imagine the future, economics will remain what it has always been.